Let's get a word on the big stories of the day. Robert Taylor is back with us, the political commentator and journalist. Afternoon to you, Robert.
Hello, Ian.
I'm sure you're a man that's changed many light bulbs, Robert. I think we can establish that without me even having to ask the question.
Well, light bulbs, yeah, but DIY, I'm as bad as Gen Z, I'm afraid. I'm absolutely appalling, so I can't claim anything there at all.
You've got some impressive shelving units behind you. Are you telling me you didn't put those up?
But they're not me, I'm afraid, Ian, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, if you go down the sort of flat pack route, I mean, you do get a fairly persuasive and instructive manual that comes with it. Often they give you a handy little Allen key to go alongside. I mean, what can go wrong?
Well, with IKEA, I used to find them okay. And actually, some of these behind me over here are IKEA ones. But these ones over here, definitely not. They were put up by someone else.
Yeah, someone who knew what they were doing, thankfully. That's why they're still up, probably, Robert. Let's talk about something that might also be falling apart. The UK economy. Rachel Reeves not in a good place. And there was a curious moment today when Keir Starmer was asked whether she'll be the Chancellor by the next election. He couldn't answer it. He has previously given an endorsement to David Lammy about longevity of his job in post, but couldn't bring himself to fully say that Rachel Reeves will be there.
Very sensible not to commit to Rachel Reeves being there in 4.5 years' time. I mean, 4.5 months' time might be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
Possibly even 4.5 weeks. I think he should, of course, have answered the question and say he's not going to play God and predict the future.
Correct.
I'm afraid he is a terrible question dodger. Yeah. And every time he dodges the question, it makes him look as though he's got something to hide. And the headlines are always terrible.
Yeah, and it's a terrible look, and, you know, Rachel Reeves is not having a good time. I know that there's some global components to it, and I'm sure if you're sitting inside the Treasury, the whole picture doesn't look quite as grim as maybe we're talking about it, but there are some realities here, and that is that you don't grow an economy by lobbing tax everywhere, which is something she has done. And, of course, if you start putting winter fuel centred to the news agenda, financial news agenda, which she did by removing the 300 quid, your credibility begins to look a little bit shot. So you put it, and then you're off to China at a time which looked, you know, look, I know our, you know, politicians have to go to we just spoke to Vince Cable. He went there, I think he said 3 or 4 times during his time as business secretary. I know you have to do that kind of stuff, but it all looks a little bit desperate. And she's now she's limping her way in and out of the Treasury on a daily basis.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a great economist to think, well, she raised taxes by an enormous amount in that catastrophic budget a few months ago. That's not going to help growth. She borrowed an enormous amount. So we're now spending £100 billion a year to service the debt. Now, she's talking about waste and she's talking about finding efficiency savings, but we are paying £100 billion. That's the education budget just to service the debt. And it's gone up hugely since her budget. That's where we're not getting growth.
Yeah. Is there a way out of it? Is there a thing that can happen? Because my sense is that it's going to get a lot worse. He'll fire Rachel Reeves. Somebody else will come in. They'll stick a little bit of a veneer on things. But, you know, the smart money at the moment, Robert says, that taxes will probably have to go up again.
Well, either taxes will have to go up or huge cuts to expenditure and huge cuts to the size of the state. I'd definitely be in favour of the latter rather than the former, because the only way out of this mess is for the state to do less, for private enterprise to be encouraged to do more. That's how you get growth, by taxing people less, taxing businesses less, encouraging enterprise. Then you get the growth to pay for public services. That's the way it's got to be done.
The funniest, well, no, it's probably not funny, really, bearing in mind what we're dealing with. One of the most interesting things, put it that way, about Rachel Reeves, of course, was the CV story of, you know, what she really did before she came into politics. And that, again, has dented her credibility. But actually, I mean, she was actually an economist. I know we sort of say she was never she wasn't an economist at the Royal Bank of Scotland, but she was for the Bank of England. So it's not as if she hasn't got a qualification for this job. But even with that impressive backstory, she's still not able to add any level of credibility in what looks like a dwindling, failing brief over there at the Treasury.
Yeah, and I think I'm right in saying that those stories about her sort of faking various elements of her LinkedIn profile or
Yeah.
deceiving people, I think was that just before the budget? It was either just before or after, but either way, it was a terrible start for a chancellor. I can't
Correct.
remember any other chancellor having such terrible headlines about their personal integrity before they've really got going.
Yeah.
And now here she is. She's only 6 months in, and the Prime Minister is already saying that he can't have complete, or he's saying he does have complete confidence, doesn't commit to anything more than that. This is a really bad sign for Rachel Reeves and for Keir Starmer, because once you lose that connection between Chancellor and Prime Minister, as those of us with long memories will remember with Nigel Lawson and with Maggie Thatcher, and it's happened sometime since then as well, that's when a government is really on the skids.
Yeah. And, you know, Rachel Reeves is a woman that looks, if you look at her face, she looks as if she's carrying the weight of the world on it at the moment, because you wonder whether she'd even want to be doing the job any longer than she currently is. I would imagine those kind of jobs, particularly top jobs like Chancellor, the workload is never ending. It's never ending.
I feel for her in that respect. I mean, it must have been a terrible weekend for her, knowing what the headlines are, knowing that it all goes wrong. It's, you know, she has to carry the can. The Prime Minister can say, oh, well, I'll get a new Chancellor. But for Rachel Reeves, the buck really stops with her. It must be an immense stress and strain. But I'm afraid she brought it on herself with that catastrophic budget.
Yeah. Well, Keir Starmer thinks he might have at least one idea to get us out of all of this, Robert, and that is artificial intelligence. The government have accepted recommendations to improve the AI infrastructure, expanding capacity 20-fold by 2030. The Prime Minister emphasised AI's potential in areas like healthcare, like education, public services. He pledged as well that it will add £50 billion to the economy annually.
Well, if it does, great. I can't see that happening any time soon. And it does seem a bit ironic to me that after the most anti-growth budget that any of us can remember, that he's now sort of clutching at the straw of AI and saying this is going to save us. I don't think it will. And in any case, he is about the fifth Prime Minister in a row to say that Britain's going to be the AI leader. We are, by the way, already number 3 in the world, behind the US and India, according to various surveys in terms of AI. So I don't think there's much more that this government can do other than do what governments should do, which is a business-friendly environment, low tax, low-touch regulation, cheap energy, which we're nowhere near in this country, and something that the government can do, which is educate kids with AI, because it's clearly going to be an important part of the future.
Yeah.
So kids need to leave school knowing what AI is about so they can be the workforce of the future.
And a final story, this is kind of out there in a different stratosphere, Robert. Nicola Sturgeon to divorce her husband. Now, this is perhaps more relevant than it normally would. I mean, when you think of dynamic, gorgeous couples, you know, Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie over the years, people like that. And now you've got Nicola and Peter that just apparently couldn't make it work. They've ended their marriage, but of course it comes against the backdrop of her being arrested, him being investigated amid embezzlement charges, allegations, as it were. But now they've decided enough is enough. I mean, God, it's going to be very quiet and boring without one of them in that house now, isn't it?
Well, of course, I mean, it's a very sad human story, of course. I mean, awful for them. It all started to go wrong for Nicola Sturgeon 2 years ago. She was still riding high, of course, Ian. And then we had that first crack in her invincibility when we had the male rapist being sent to a female prison. And then Sturgeon had to change her mind. That was the first crack. Then we had this awful embezzlement scandal. Then finally she resigned. So it all went horribly wrong professionally, I'm afraid, for Sturgeon. And now none of us wish this on them in their personal marriage as well. So it's a sad old story from, having the world your oyster and then falling flat on your face.
It's curious, isn't it, how that has absolutely changed? Because, of course, when we were talking about the potential of, Labour winning the election last year, just a year before that, of course, everybody agreed, well, they can't overturn that massive Tory majority. And even if they could overturn some of it, they certainly can't overturn Scotland, where the SNP have got the whole thing wrapped up. Sturgeon seems very popular. She gave those kind of daily COVID press because she was there every single day doing it. Her star was rising as Johnson's was failing, which was a bit curious because they both had the same data. Never quite worked that out, but nonetheless, that's how it seemed to work. And there's no way you can surmount or overtake or penetrate the SNP. So it was a done deal that Labour couldn't do anything north of the border. And yet, fast forward what seems half an hour, and the whole thing fell apart. And the SNP...
And it just shows how quickly things can change. And people were saying of Boris Johnson in 2019, 80-seat majority, he's in for 2 terms.
Yep.
Well, he was gone within, 3 years. So it can all happen very rapidly, and it's happening very rapidly to this Labour government as well. Massive landslide, and now they're in big trouble. Things change much more quickly now than they ever used to.
Yeah, do indeed.